So I know the title may be a bit dramatic, but I legitimately believe that Ben McLemore saved his career this year with the Rockets. For years, we saw McLemore as a guy who just didn't totally know what he was doing. Like, he could shoot, but he wasn't really a shooter. Whether that was because he just simply wasn't shooting enough, or teams weren't using him right, or he was trying to go off the dribble too much. And there's arguments to be made every which way. But it just simply wasn't happening enough to justify putting him out there, right? Defensively, wasn't bringing it. And he just seemed like he might have just been on the path to getting lost within the NBA thing. You know, he changed teams. He ended up on the Grizzlies after 4 years with the Kings. It didn't go well. Ends up back on the Kings, plays 19 games, 8 minutes a game. 25 years old, kind of been established that he wasn't going to be the awesome player that some thought he could have been. And that, usually at that point, we see for a guy, that's usually when you end up overseas, or you just kind of, you might pop up a little bit again, and then that's it. Or you can have what happened with Ben McLemore this year with the Rockets, which is he goes on a team that needs his shooting, and they're just going to say, look, we don't want you to dribble, we just want you to stand in the corner or spot up on the elbow and shoot open threes and, try not to be horrible defensively. And Ben McLemore had his best season, and I feel like now he's carved out a place for himself in the NBA, which is just being a shooter. And, he's not going to be the scorer that some people thought he could have been, but I think at this point he'll take it, you know what I mean? He shot 40% on 6 threes a game. His efficiency was pretty damn good. I mean, he mainly just took threes, but he had a 62% true shooting percentage. That's awesome. If we look at his shot distribution, this is one of my favorite things to look at. 83% of his shots were three-pointers. I love it. It's beautiful. If I was an NBA player, that's what I would want to be. And the thing that bodes well for McLemore off of this season is that he was consistently good. It's not like he was amazing for 1 month and then was kind of blah the others. He did come out of the gates kind of slow. November, he shot 32% from 3. But from December till basically when the season ended, he was at about 10 points. He attempted about, 5 to 8 threes a game, depending on whatever month you want to look at. And he was actually in the deep 40s for most of it. Like, in February, he attempted about 5 threes a game, which is a little lower than the rest of the year, but he shot 47% from 3. Like, there you go. And while this was pretty obvious, I'll just say it anyway, 96% of his threes were assisted, so not a lot of pull-ups or anything. He really is just playing off of Harden and Westbrook, and that can work out. I mean, I think another thing to talk about is defensively. If McLemore was not playing well on that side of the floor, which I think he's been pretty okay, he wasn't killing Houston. Like, their lineup numbers are great with him. I mean, his on-off stuff, it's all in the positives. They're better with him than without him. And I don't think he is the sole reason for any of that, but it's all good stuff nonetheless. He's not killing his team when he's out there. He's making shots. You couldn't have said that for most of his career, so it's great. Now, in terms of, if we get back to his shooting, it's not a lot of, floppy sets or running around or that type of thing. And depending on another team he would end up on, they might want him to do a little bit more of that, and can he handle that? I would like to think so. I don't know for a fact. I mean, can he be the next Wayne Ellington, where he's flying around and taking off-balance threes with defenders in his face? It's probably too much to ask for. I mean, I think at this point with McLemore, if he could just simply make spot-up threes, we'll take it. So we don't totally know there. If we look at McLemore's career moving forward, he does have a non-guaranteed contract of $2 million next season. If I was Houston, I would definitely pick that option up because he's been good, and this team doesn't have a lot of money to really go around. And we will hope that McLemore can continue to do this. And then it becomes interesting about what would he be worth in the open market. I mean, it depends. Maybe he comes in the next season, he's just guns blazing, and he's like the shooting guard version of Davis Bertans. But even if he isn't, let's say he just does what he did this year. 10 points, good from outside, playing a role well, and all that stuff. Could he make, I don't know, $7 million a year somewhere? Get a nice 2 or 3 year contract? Maybe. I feel like I say this with basically every shooter, but I'll say it now again. I would love for my Celtics to have him because they got a whole bunch of guys off the bench who teams are not going to care about, whereas you do have to care about McLemore. I think another thing with Ben, and this was talked about way back when he was drafted, I remember this, there were some fears about his confidence. And the idea if he could have a couple bad games in a row or whatever and you start to get down on himself. And I remember that there was a story about D'Antoni basically saying that he knew Ben was struggling to make shots early in the year, but he was going to give him a lot of time to figure it out. That could matter on whatever team he ends up on next. There's also, it seems like it's basically written on the walls that Mike D'Antoni's not going to be the coach of this team next year. And if that's the case, that could be potentially a rough thing for Ben. I mean, I feel like no matter who they hire, there's always going to be a priority on shooting threes and stuff. But if it's not going to be D'Antoni and it's going to be a guy who's not as patient, that could be rough for Ben. Now, of course, Ben McLemore is not the top priority, but if we're going to talk about him specifically, there is a chance that he needs to have more of a nurturing head coach who is not going to be as impatient when it comes to decisions. And, Thibodeau has been rumored for this team. I feel like Tom Thibodeau might be a little impatient. If Ben McLemore opens up next season under Tom Thibodeau, and in the first 15 games he shoots 31% from outside, there's a chance we're just never going to see him again, And then there's a chance we're having this conversation again because then he'd be a free agent. But even so, I feel like this season is good enough from Ben to where teams could look at what he did and be like, oh, you know what, we can replicate that. And again, I will say I would love for my Celtics to have him because they don't have anybody on the bench who can make a three. Unless, well, sometimes Marcus Smart, but I don't want to rely on that one, Moving away from my Celtics, who could use a shooter at the cheap contract? Oh, I don't know, every single team in the league. So, yeah, I mean, even a team like the Knicks, who are just desperate for any sort of shooting, could they end up with Ben McLemore and he could just reliably make some threes and average 9 points a game for him? Hey, I would certainly take it. I mean, he's been better than Ntilikina and Dennis Smith and Alonzo Trier and whoever else you want to bust out from the random thing of Knicks young guys who haven't worked out. Kevin Knox is another one. Like, this season alone from Ben McLemore has made him better than all those guys, I feel like another team who could be looking at Ben is like the Bucks. I mean, they basically did the same thing with Wesley Matthews. They gave him a cheap contract, and they were like, yeah, Wesley, your best days may be behind you, but you've been better lately. And you're not going to cost much, and you're going to fit into our system of just spacing for Giannis. And I could see it. I could see McLemore ending up on a team like the Bucks where, he would start and he'd play. He might be like an 18, 19 minute a game starter, but he just does his job well. Or a team like OKC, which seems to love shooting guards who can't shoot. So they would still have their Schroeder with the starters closing lineup, but then you could have McLemore sprinkled into all of that to just simply space the floor out. The Sixers are always in need of shooting, so there's another potential spot for him. I'm saying all this again under the idea that for whatever reason he wouldn't be on the Rockets next year or 2 years from now. I think it's definitely in the cards for Houston to extend him after next season if he can keep this up. But yeah, just to say it again, because I did want to point this out, because I do feel like it wasn't super underrated, like it was talked about a bit, but I didn't talk about it, but I feel like it was something I tweeted a couple of times or whatever, and just want to give him his due. Like Ben McLemore, there was a chance that his NBA career wasn't going to go on for much longer, and I think he proved that he's still got a spot in the league.